If you've ever switched your camera over to manual mode and immediately felt overwhelmed, then this video is for you. I'm a professional photographer and I'm going to explain manual mode in a simple way that actually makes sense. I'm not going to be using any sort of complicated charts, just real life situations. A lot of my work involves a blurry bokeh background. I use a wide open aperture, and I'll go over how to do that as well as how to make more crisp, clean photos with more depth of field. Manual mode is actually composed of three major factors. You may have heard these terms before. They're aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. They sound a little bit more complicated than they are, and I'm going to walk you through each of them individually, describe what they are, and how you can adjust them quickly while you're taking a photo. The first one we're going to talk about is aperture, and this refers to light and depth. You may have heard the term bokeh or depth of field, and that's where aperture comes into play. The next one that's important is called shutter. This is shutter speed, and this has to do with the speed of your subject and the speed of your camera and how you're going to capture that image without making it blurry. Unless, of course, you want a blurry photo, which is also something you can do with time-lapse photography. And the last one you're going to hear about is ISO. This one has to do with brightness and noise. Brightness is how bright your image is, and noise is how grainy your photo looks. So these three things, aperture, shutter, and ISO, work together in harmony to create a perfect photo. And it just takes a little bit of practice. I have a lot of tips and tricks that I've learned over the years. I photograph children and moving objects, and I can easily make adjustments on the fly. Let me get right into it. I use Nikon DSLRs. These are a couple of old models, but this can work on any brand of camera that has a manual mode. And it's surprisingly easy to get the hang of this trifecta: aperture, ISO, and shutter speed once you just practice with it a little bit. And all of these rules are going to apply both indoors and outdoors. It works with indoor light as well as regular outdoor light. And it's also great for stable and moving objects. This really gives you the flexibility to photograph anything that you want. And this can be accomplished without using any sort of off-camera flash. Let's just take a close-up look at the controls and get started with aperture. So here's a look at the top of my camera, and yours may look a little bit different depending on the model and make of your camera, but typically you can find a manual mode right on the top of your camera. Every camera is just a little bit different, but most of them will have this mode button on the top. And if you just push this button and rotate the dial, you can toggle between the different modes. M is typically manual, A is for automatic, and so forth. You can also choose aperture priority and other settings as well. So just go ahead and set your camera to the manual mode. That's where we're going to start. The first thing we're going to look at is aperture. And remember, aperture refers to depth and light. That's where you're going to get that bokeh effect or a blurry background. And this is really easy to change. On my camera, there's a dial in the front, and this adjusts the aperture. So you can easily do this while you're holding your camera, and you can change it during a photo session. So if you look closely on the front screen, you'll see F followed by a number, and that refers to your aperture. The smaller this number, the more blurry the background. The larger this number, the more crisp and clear your background will be. I'll tell you that from experience, my sweet spot is around 2.5. That gives me a nice blurry background and a subject that's perfectly crisp and clear. Sometimes if you take that number below 2 or a little bit under 2, you can get blurry features. Or if you have multiple people in the frame, I would highly suggest doing 2.5 or 3 if you're still wanting that blurry background. But this is easy to adjust quickly. If your screen times out, just gently push this power button and you'll see that F number again, and rotate to the left to adjust. I'm going to set mine at 2.5. Now that I've set one of the parameters, the aperture, now that depends on how the ISO and shutter function work. They all work in unison to capture the most amount of light. So when you have an aperture setting as low as 2.5, which is fairly low, you're going to have a lot of light let into your camera. This means that the opening in the front of your camera is wide open and it's letting in tons of light. So you want to adjust your shutter speed and ISO appropriately. I happen to know that when I'm shooting subjects, I'm almost always going to leave this F number at 2.5. So I really don't need to worry about it very much. I focus mostly on shutter speed and ISO. So let's talk about shutter speed. This is another one that's really important depending on what subject you are capturing. This is really easy to change with the back button. Now your camera may be a little bit different. Mine just uses this dial in the back. So apertures in the front, shutter speeds in the back. And you can see when I rotate this dial, this number on the top changes. And I love to leave this around 250. I don't like to go much below that if I'm capturing anything that moves whatsoever. I focus mostly on pets, families, babies, and teenagers and seniors, and 250 seems to be a really great middle ground for me. If I'm asking a subject to move or run, I'll put the shutter speed way up to 640 or even higher, and this will allow me to capture a clear image while the subject is moving. For general everyday posed photos or slower movements, I'm just going to keep this at 250. That will allow enough light to come through my camera that I can keep this aperture at 2.5 and the subject can move within reason and the image will not be blurry. So those are my two set features. I keep my aperture at 2.5 most of the time, and I keep my shutter speed at 250 unless my subject is going to be running or doing fast motion. And that shutter button is what you hear, that click sound. If you make your shutter speed really, really low, like you can make your shutter speed all the way down to 30, you'll hear that the shutter is much slower. You can even go down. And you can hear how long it took that shutter to click. It was letting in a lot of light. Some people like to use this for slow motion photography for rivers, streams, and waterfalls. If that's the type of photography you use, you might want to put your camera on a tripod so it doesn't wiggle around, because that shutter's open a very long time and any small amount of movement will make your image completely blurry. For our purposes, we're going to set this at 250. Because that's my basic setup during a photo session, I only really ever need to adjust the ISO. And this is really easy to do by pushing the ISO button here and rotating this dial on the back, the same one that I use for shutter speed. ISO is going to change with the amount of light you have in your room. Now remember, ISO has to do with brightness and noise. So you want a low ISO. The lower the number, the better. If you could keep it at 100, that's ideal. That means you have sufficient light to capture your image who's sitting, standing, or moving slowly and getting a nice blurry background. However, that's not always the case, especially if you're shooting indoors and just using natural window light. You might need to bump up that ISO, and that's fine too. Cameras nowadays are pretty good at not showing a lot of grainy noise, and if you see noise on a photo, it's pretty immediately a poor quality photo. This is something you really want to avoid. On this camera, I can go all the way up to 1000, but I would never bump it up above that. In fact, 1000 is really my upper limit. Below 800 is more ideal. So you're going to look through your camera and you're going to see a grid, and that's going to tell you how you need to adjust your ISO depending on the type of light that you're working with. I'll show you an example in my house on a cloudy day. And before we get started with some real life examples, I just want to show you that every camera body is just a little bit different, but they have the same basic functionality. This is another Nikon brand. Canon looks a little bit different, but it functions very similarly. Some of the buttons are on the opposite side on a Canon, but it all works the same. And you'll notice that when you're adjusting your camera, it's all within reach. So you're holding your camera like this to take a photo. You can adjust your aperture here, your shutter speed here, and then hold this button in here and adjust your ISO. So you never even need to take your camera away from your face to make these adjustments, which is really important when you're taking fast shots during a photo session. This camera is a Nikon D850. The other one is a Nikon D800. They're older model cameras. I've used them for years and years. They're really workhorses in my business. High recommend if you're looking for a high quality camera. These will last you forever. But you can see the front of this Nikon D850 is essentially the same. So I can adjust my aperture right here in the front. I can adjust my shutter speed in the back, and I can hold down the ISO button, which is right here on this camera, and adjust that back button to adjust my ISO. And if you're interested in talking about lenses, that's definitely something that I can address in a future video. I use prime lenses, which mean that they don't zoom in and out. They have a specified distance, and I use two camera bodies, and I put my two favorite lenses on the two bodies. I sling one camera over one shoulder and I hold the other one around my neck, and I just swap back and forth during a photo session. For me, that's easier than changing a lens, and it eliminates the problem of getting debris inside my camera if I'm changing my lens in a field or on a beach. Switching to manual mode is going to make a huge difference in how your photos look. It's going to take you from looking like an amateur to looking like a professional almost immediately. It's just a matter of figuring out how the three components work together, and it's really not that difficult. I am self-taught, and just playing around for a month, I became much more comfortable with my camera. Just remember, aperture has to do with light and depth, shutter speed has to do with movement, and ISO has to do with brightness and noise. In this series, I'll take you through a number of real-world scenarios. Today, we're just going to start simply indoors with natural window light. I'm in my living room. It's an overcast day. I don't have a ton of light to work with, but I do have a nice big bay of windows that are directly to the side of the area that I'm going to be shooting. Our background blurred area is going to be this planter with a pot, and the subject is going to be my dog. So the goal is going to be to get a nice sharp photo of my puppy with a blurred background. The light will be coming in from the side, and I'll go into depth about lighting later. I never use off-camera lighting. A lot of my photo shoots are on site, and I don't ever bother to bring lighting along with me, so I just use the high power of my camera to make adjustments for the lighting. You'd be surprised how much you can accomplish with just the settings on your camera. So the first thing I'm gonna do is make sure that my aperture is set where I want it at 2.5, and I'm gonna put my shutter speed at 250. I don't anticipate that my puppy will be moving very much, but he might move just a little bit, and 250 would be just fine. Remember, you're going to set your aperture a little bit lower if you want the background more blurry, but because a dog has a snout in the front, you don't wanna go lower than 2.5 because his nose will be blurry while the rest of his body is clear, or vice versa. As far as shutter speed, 250 is just fine indoors. If he was going to be running outside in the yard, I'd put it all the way up to 600 or 800. And then we'll check on the ISO once we have him in position and we look at the grid on the camera. We're going to start at 100 and we'll adjust it from there. And remember, we're going to increase the ISO if the image looks dark or muddy, and it's okay to go all the way up to 800 or 1000 if we need to. So I have my dog here. He's getting ready to take his photo. He smelled that I got treats out. And I have my camera here. So you can see that I have it set at 2.5 aperture and 250 shutter speed, and with the ISO at 100. When you look through the camera, you're gonna see your 250 and your 2.5 number, and directly to the right of that, you'll see a graph. The lines are currently now left of center. There is a 0 mark and lines that go all the way over to the left. That's telling me that my light is really low and I need to increase my ISO. If it was just perfect lighting, there would be no lines to the left and no lines to the right. That graph would stay just in the center. If I was in a scenario where there was too much light, those lines would extend to the right instead of to the left. So I'm going to push my ISO button and I'm going to adjust that ISO in an upward direction, and you can see those lines are moving towards the center. All right, so now I have a line just one to the left of 0, which is fine. If you have 1 or 2 to the left or right, it doesn't matter. You can always fix that in post. And let's take a look at what that number ended up being. If I push ISO, you can see that I had to go all the way up to 400 to get those lines lined up for the proper lighting. Now that I have a general sense of how much light is in the room, let's set my dog up on a spot and take a photo. Okay, so I have Timber here, and he's gonna be my helper today. We'll see how cooperative he is, but we're gonna have him sit about 5 to 10 feet in front of the planter. That's another trick. You need to make sure you have space between your subject and the thing that you want blurred in the background. Even with 5 to 10 feet, you can get enough blur to have a really nice photo. So we're gonna set Timber about 10 feet away from this plant and see what we can get. Stay. Stay. I'm using the same settings that we just set up. This is aperture 2.5, shutter speed of 250, and my ISO is set at 400. You can see that I'm moving further away from him and closer to him. And the closer I move to him, the more blurry the background will be. The further away I move from him, the less blurry the background will be. So you can move yourself or you can move your subject. Either works. Good boy. I'll process those photos and I'll pop them up on the video so you can see the difference. So here's the finished product with just light editing in Lightroom. I just brought up the exposure and the darks, and you can see that that plant in the background is nice and blurred, and he is perfectly clear. The light is nice coming from the side window. This is a beautiful pet photo. I'm focusing right on the tip of his nose, and then I'll also focus on his eye, and we'll see which one turns out better. You can see here how much depth a dog face has. This is the same with humans, so always focus on the eye. You can see how nice and clear the eye is. The nose looks a little bit out of focus, but for this photo, I don't even mind. And also note in this photo how crisp and clear he is, and because I'm so close to him, that background is extra blurry and bokeh. Also practice shooting horizontal and vertical. Don't be afraid to change the orientation of your photo. Take advantage of your subject being seated and ready for you. Move yourself closer, farther away, change your angle slightly, and rotate your camera. Get a whole bunch of angles. Start at nose level, move up above, and also go below. Just move all around your subject before you repose them into a different position. This is something that I had to learn over and over again in my photography business, and it's really saved me so much time and effort. And don't be afraid to overshoot. Photos are cheap. You can always just cull out the ones that you don't want later, but you'll always regret missing that moment. So just shoot away and go through them later. And you can even use AI software to help you determine which are the best ones to keep later. While you have your subject in place, don't forget to get the little detail shots as well. You don't want just full body shots or face shots. Get pictures of paws, hands, toes, tips of tails, and sometimes those actually end up being your favorite images. And don't be afraid to get really, really close to your subject as well. Focus in on some freckles or some hairs. And if it looks blurry to you through your camera, just back up a little bit. So here are some of those close-up shots, and they are some of my favorites. I love these little details, the paws, and particularly the eye. It just gives a really nice artistic look to my gallery. And keep in mind, all these photos I'm showing you are using the exact same photo settings when I'm taking the photo. Now we're going to also set him really close to the planter so we can see the difference. So now he's sitting really close. This is going to be a pretty photo, but you'll see that it's not going to be blurred in the background. So here's an example of how you can add variety to your gallery. I haven't changed anything on my photo settings. I've just moved him closer to the plant, which gives a completely different look to the photo. Who's a good boy? I love when a subject is looking out the side window with the light hitting their face, but the light isn't shining directly into my camera. I can capture some really nice light that way. And here I've turned him to the side so he's actually facing out the window, and this completely changes the entire lighting of the photo. You can see that my highlights are higher, the darks are brighter, and the shadows are different here too. So keep in mind my settings did not change when I turned him, but if I'm looking at my camera and I'm seeing that the photo looks a little blown out, this would be a scenario and where I would just adjust the ISO. It was at 400, I might bump it down to 200. That way I don't have to deal with it later in post, and it's really easy to edit. This goes the same for children and families as well. With lots of practice, this just becomes completely automatic. So even though I'm shooting in manual mode, all I had to do here was slightly adjust my ISO. I hope this video helped you learn a little bit about manual mode. It doesn't have to be intimidating, and it will really level up your photos. If you're interested, I'm happy to post some more videos in the series regarding lenses, outdoor scenarios. I'm also happy to show you different setups, like how I do my focus. Back button focus has been a huge game changer for me. I also can go through my culling and editing process. Comment below if you have any questions.